Elena Harper stirred awake to the gentle hum of the city filtering through her bedroom window, the soft September light casting a golden glow across her cozy room. It was the kind of autumn morning that felt like a gift, crisp and clear, with leaves just beginning to turn outside their upscale apartment in the heart of the city. She stretched beneath the warm duvet, her mind already mapping out the day's errands, restocking the nearly bare fridge, grabbing laundry detergent, and picking up a bouquet of lilies to brighten the dining table. Married to Marcus Harper for 2 years, Elena had settled into a life that balanced quiet simplicity with the unspoken wealth of her husband's success as the CEO of Harper Enterprises. Most people didn't know the extent of Marcus's fortune, and Elena preferred it that way, finding joy in small rituals like brewing fresh coffee or curling up with a worn paperback novel. Today, she needed $600 from their account at Metropolitan Bank, enough for groceries, household supplies, and a quiet lunch at her favorite cafe, a little treat to savor the day. Looking in the mirror, she saw a woman content with her life, unaware that her modest appearance would soon ignite a chain of events that would test her spirit. The Metropolitan Bank loomed on the corner of Park and Elm, its marble facade and towering columns exuding old-world wealth. Elena always felt a flicker of unease stepping into its grand lobby, where crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over polished mahogany counters and gleaming marble floors. The air carried the faint scent of expensive cologne, mingling with the low murmur of conversations about stock portfolios and offshore accounts. Men in tailored suits and women with designer handbags moved with purpose, their confidence a stark contrast to Elena's quiet presence. She approached the teller counter, her sneakers soft against the hard floor, and greeted a young teller named Sarah with a genuine smile. "Good morning. I'd like to withdraw $600 from my checking account," she said, sliding her ID and debit card across the counter with the ease of someone who'd done this a dozen times before. The request was simple, routine, a quick stop before her errands could begin in earnest. Sarah returned her smile, her kind eyes crinkling, but as she typed into her computer, her expression shifted, a subtle crease forming between her brows. Elena noticed, her stomach tightening ever so slightly, though she brushed it off as nothing. "One moment, please," Sarah said, her voice taking on a formal edge that hadn't been there before. Elena nodded, standing patiently, but the air in the lobby seemed to shift, growing heavier. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. The worn leather, a familiar comfort against the growing sense of being out of place. She told herself it was just her imagination, that people weren't really judging her, but the weight of their gazes felt real, palpable. Sarah disappeared behind the counter, her footsteps echoing as she headed toward a glass-walled office in the back. She shifted her weight, trying to focus on the soft hum of the bank's air conditioning, but her heart began to pound, a quiet dread creeping in. Sarah returned, her face apologetic, and leaned forward to whisper, "I need to get my manager's approval for this withdrawal." Elena's confusion deepened. $600 wasn't a large sum, and she knew their account had more than enough to cover it. She nodded, forcing a smile, but the unease grew, a knot tightening in her chest. Through the glass partition, she saw Sarah speaking to a tall woman in a pristine suit, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her posture radiating authority. The woman glanced toward Elena, her eyes cold and assessing, and Elena felt a chill, as if she'd been weighed and found wanting. She stood there, a kind soul who asked for little, caught in the crosshairs of a system that seemed to judge her before knowing her story. The bank's opulence, once merely intimidating, now felt like a stage for an impending humiliation she couldn't yet name. Her heart, so full of warmth that morning, now thrummed with a quiet fear as she waited for what would come next, unaware that this simple errand was about to unravel into the most humbling moment of her life. Elena stood at the teller counter, her fingers clutching the worn strap of her purse as the weight of the bank's grandeur pressed against her. The soft hum of conversations and the occasional clink of coins faded into a tense silence as Sarah, the teller, returned from the back office, her expression tight with unease. Behind her strode Victoria Langston, the branch manager, a woman whose presence seemed to command the very air in the room. Tall and statuesque, Victoria's white designer suit gleamed under the chandelier's light, her blonde hair swept into an impeccable chignon that spoke of meticulous control. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, each step a declaration of authority. and her pale green eyes swept over Elena with a cold, calculating glint. Elena offered a polite smile, hoping to diffuse the growing tension, but Victoria's lips curled into a thin, dismissive line. "I understand you're requesting a withdrawal," Victoria said, her voice crisp and laced with condescension, loud enough to draw the attention of nearby patrons. Elena nodded, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "Yes, just $600 for groceries and some household items." The simplicity of her request hung in the air, but Victoria's gaze lingered on Elena's jeans and sweater, her eyes narrowing, as if Elena's appearance was an affront to the bank's polished image. $600 is a significant amount, Victoria declared, her tone implying Elena was attempting something far grander than a routine transaction. Elena's cheeks warmed, confusion giving way to a sinking realization that she was being judged. "It's my account, and I have more than enough to cover it," she said, her voice firm but quiet, hoping to keep the exchange discreet. Victoria, however, seemed to relish the audience now gathering, their curious glances prickling Elena's skin. She tapped her manicured nails on the counter, the sound sharp and deliberate, and leaned forward slightly. "We have protocols for withdrawals of this nature," she said, her words dripping with skepticism. "I'll need additional documentation, proof of employment, recent pay stubs, and verification of your account's deposits." The request was absurd, and Elena's heart raced as she processed the implication. She was a legitimate customer, her account funded by Marcus's business, yet Victoria's tone suggested she was a fraud, a nobody daring to step into this elite space. "I've never needed that before," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly, not from fear but from the sting of being so publicly scrutinized. The lobby had grown quieter, the other customers' whispers now a soft hum of judgment. Victoria's smile tightened, her eyes glinting with something almost predatory. "Large deposits followed by immediate withdrawals can indicate suspicious activity," she announced, her voice carrying across the lobby like a verdict. The word suspicious landed like a slap, and Elena's breath caught, her mind reeling at the accusation. She had never been accused of anything dishonest in her life, and the injustice of it burned in her chest. "There's no suspicious activity," she said, her voice rising despite her effort to stay calm. "This is my money, and I'm just trying to buy groceries." But Victoria was undeterred, her confidence growing with every eye now fixed on the scene. "Step aside, please," she said, gesturing toward the security guard stationed near the entrance. "You're holding up our other clients." Elena's heart pounded, her face flushing with a mix of anger and humiliation as the guard, a middle-aged man with a weary expression, took a step closer. His hand rested lightly on his radio, a silent warning that made Elena feel like a criminal, in a place she had every right to be. "I'd like to speak to someone else," she said, her voice cracking but resolute, desperate for someone to see her as more than the assumptions Victoria had cast upon her. Victoria's smile was icy, her posture unyielding. "I am the branch manager, and this is my decision," she said, her words final, cutting through the air like a blade. "If you cannot provide the documentation, you'll need to leave." The lobby was now a stage, and Elena was the unwitting center of a drama she hadn't chosen. The guard approached, his voice low but firm. "Ma'am, please come with me." Elena's eyes darted around, searching for a single ally among the sea of indifferent faces, but no one spoke up. The weight of their stares, their silence, crushed her, and she felt smaller than she ever had, her dignity slipping away with each step toward the exit. "You're making a mistake," she whispered, barely audible, as Victoria's voice followed her, loud and triumphant. "We cannot allow disruptive behavior to compromise our client's security," she declared, as if casting Elena out was a noble act. The glass doors loomed ahead, and as Elena stepped into the sharp autumn air, the humiliation was complete. She stood on the sidewalk, her hands trembling, her heart heavy with the sting of being judged, dismissed, and discarded. Elena stood trembling on the bustling sidewalk outside Metropolitan Bank, the autumn air sharp against her flushed cheeks as she tried to steady her breathing. The sting of Victoria's words and the weight of the lobby's judgmental stares clung to her like a heavy fog, her heart aching with a mix of shame and anger. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers clumsy as she dialed Marcus's number, desperate for the comfort of his voice, the one person who always saw her for who she truly was. The call went to voicemail, his phone likely silenced in one of his high-stakes meetings, and Elena's shoulders sagged, the loneliness of the moment wrapping around her like a cold embrace. Passers-by hurried past, their faces blurred in their own worlds, oblivious to the quiet devastation of a woman who had just been cast out of a bank for daring to access her own money. She clutched her purse, the worn leather a small anchor, and fought the tears threatening to spill, determined not to let Victoria's cruelty define her. Her mind replayed the morning's warmth sipping coffee with Marcus, his teasing smile as he kissed her goodbye before heading to his office, and the contrast to this moment made her chest tighten. She was no stranger to feeling out of place in Marcus's world of wealth, but she had always carried herself with quiet dignity, believing kindness and authenticity mattered more than appearances. Now, standing alone on Park Street, she felt invisible, reduced to nothing by a woman who didn't even know her name. Just as despair began to settle, a low, elegant rumble cut through the city's hum, pulling Elena's gaze upward. A sleek black Bentley glided toward the curb, its polished chrome catching the sunlight like a beacon. The car was a masterpiece, its curves and sheen drawing gasps from pedestrians, but it was the man behind the wheel who made Elena's heart leap. Marcus Harper stepped out, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection, his presence radiating a quiet power that shifted the energy around him. His dark eyes, usually warm and playful when they met hers, were now sharp with concern as he spotted her, standing small and shaken on the sidewalk. In 3 swift strides, he was at her side, his hands gently cupping her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears she hadn't realized had fallen. "Elena, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice low but urgent, the kind of tone that could calm a storm or start one. She collapsed into his arms, the familiar scent of his cologne grounding her, and poured out the story in a rush of the teller's hesitation. Victoria's accusations, the public humiliation, the security guard's firm hand guiding her out. "They treated me like a thief, Marcus," she whispered, her voice breaking. "All I wanted was $600 for groceries, and she said I looked suspicious, like I didn't belong." Marcus's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening with a controlled fury she rarely saw, the kind that surfaced only when someone he loved was hurt. He held her close, his embrace a shield against the world, and she felt the strength of his resolve in the steady beat of his heart. "Which bank?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm, though his gaze had already locked onto the towering glass doors of Metropolitan Bank behind her. Elena hesitated, the thought of returning to that marble-walled stage of her shame filling her with dread. But Marcus's hand found hers, his grip firm and reassuring. "You don't deserve this," he said, his eyes searching hers, fierce with love and determination. "No one gets to treat you this way, not ever." His words were a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge of self-doubt, reminding her of the life they'd built together, rooted in mutual respect and unwavering support. Those memories, fleeting but vivid, bolstered her courage. Marcus straightened, his posture commanding, and took her hand, leading her toward the bank's entrance. "Let's go fix this," he said, his voice carrying a promise of justice that sent a shiver through her. Elena's heart pounded, torn between fear of facing Victoria again and trust in Marcus's unyielding strength. The Bentley sat gleaming at the curb, a symbol of the life they shared, but it was Marcus's quiet fury and unshakable love that gave her the courage to step forward. As they approached the glass doors, Elena felt the weight of the moment shift, a spark of hope igniting within her. This wasn't just about righting a wrong, it was about reclaiming her dignity, and Marcus was her partner in that fight. The city's noise faded, and all she could hear was the steady rhythm of their steps, together, toward a reckoning she couldn't yet fully imagine. The heavy glass doors of Metropolitan Bank swung open, and Elena felt the air shift as she and Marcus stepped back into the marble lobby, its opulence now a stark backdrop to the storm brewing within her husband. Marcus's presence was magnetic, his tailored charcoal suit and measured stride drawing every eye in the room. From the suited professionals clutching briefcases to the tellers frozen behind their counters, Elena clung to his hand, her heart still raw from the earlier humiliation, but his steady grip anchored her, a silent vow that she would not face this alone. The same patrons who had watched her rejection with detached curiosity now turned, their whispers fading into a charged silence as Marcus led her to the teller counter where her ordeal had begun. Sarah, the young teller, looked up, her eyes widening, At the sight of Marcus, his commanding aura a sharp contrast to Elena's unassuming presence. "Good afternoon," Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made the air feel taut. "I'd like to speak with your branch manager about the treatment my wife received here." Before Sarah could respond, Victoria Langston emerged from her glass-walled office, her confident stride faltering as she caught sight of Marcus. Her pale green eyes flickered with recognition, and for a moment, fear shadowed her perfectly composed features. Elena noticed the shift, a crack in the armor of the woman who had so ruthlessly dismissed her. Victoria smoothed her designer suit, regaining her poise, and approached with a forced smile. "Mr. Harper," she said, her voice betraying a slight tremor. "What an unexpected pleasure. How can I assist you?" Marcus's expression remained unyielding, his dark eyes locking onto hers, with an intensity that made her flinch. "Miss Langston, I understand you accused my wife of suspicious activity and had her removed from your bank for attempting to withdraw $600 from her own account," he said, his words deliberate, each one landing like a stone in the silent lobby. Victoria's smile wavered, her gaze darting to Elena, who stood tall despite the echo of her earlier shame. "There was a misunderstanding," Victoria said quickly, her voice pitching higher. "We have protocols for large withdrawals, and there were irregularities that required verification." Marcus's brow lifted, his calm demeanor masking a fury Elena knew well from rare moments when his principles were challenged. "Irregularities," he repeated, his tone cutting through her excuse. "In an account I personally funded with deposits from Harper Enterprises, an account with more than enough to cover a modest withdrawal." The lobby was now a theater, every customer and employee riveted, their transactions forgotten as they watched the drama unfold. Victoria's face paled, her hands clasping tightly at her sides. "If I had known she was your wife," she began, but Marcus cut her off, his voice steady but sharp. "If you had known what, Miss Langston? That she's married to someone with influence, that she doesn't need to wear diamonds to prove her worth." Elena's heart swelled at his words, the sting of Victoria's judgment easing under the fierce protection in his voice. "You judged my wife based on her appearance," Marcus continued, his voice rising just enough to carry across the room. "You humiliated her in front of your clients, accused her of fraud, and had her escorted out like a criminal." Victoria opened her mouth to protest, but no words came, her confidence crumbling under the weight of his accusations. Elena saw the other customers shifting, some exchanging glances, others looking away, as if confronted by their own complicity in her earlier ordeal. Marcus's presence seemed to expand, filling the room with a quiet authority that demanded accountability. "Harper Enterprises maintains multiple accounts here," he said, his tone now cold and precise. "Payroll for thousands, investment portfolios, operating funds accounts that dwarf this branch's portfolio. Effective immediately, we're closing them all and moving to a bank that values respect over appearances." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Victoria's face drained of color, her hands trembling visibly now. The magnitude of losing such a client was clear, not just to her but to every employee watching, their faces a mix of shock and dread. "Mr. Harper, please," Victoria stammered, her voice pleading, a far cry from the arrogance she'd wielded earlier. "Let's discuss this privately. There must be a way to resolve this." Marcus shook his head, his expression resolute. "You made this public when you chose to shame my wife in front of everyone here. Now you'll face the consequences in front of them too." He turned to the gathered crowd, his voice clear and unwavering. "Let this be a reminder. True wealth isn't in what you wear or what you own. It's in how you treat those you think have nothing to offer." Elena felt a surge of pride, her earlier humiliation transforming into a quiet strength as she stood beside him, her hand still in his. Victoria's eyes glistened with unshed tears, her professional facade shattered, and for a fleeting moment, Elena felt a pang of pity for the woman who had brought this upon herself. But Marcus's resolve was unshakable, and as he gave Elena's hand a gentle squeeze, she knew this moment was about more than justice. It was about reclaiming her place in a world that had tried to diminish her. Elena felt the weight of the bank's marble lobby lift as she and Marcus stepped out into the crisp September sunlight, the glass doors closing behind them with a soft thud that marked the end of her ordeal. His hand, warm and steady, held hers, tightly grounding her as the city's hum-honking taxis, chattering pedestrians, rushed back into focus. Her heart, still bruised from Victoria's cruelty, began to mend under the quiet strength of Marcus's presence, his love a balm that soothed the raw edges of her humiliation. He opened the door of the Bentley, its sleek interior a stark contrast to the cold judgment of the bank, and as she sank into the leather seat, Alina exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Marcus slid into the driver's seat, his dark eyes softening as he looked at her, a gentle smile breaking through the lingering storm in his expression. "I'm so sorry you went through that," he said, his voice low and sincere, carrying the weight of his regret that she'd been hurt. "No one will ever treat you like that again, not while I'm here." Elena's throat tightened, not from pain but from the overwhelming certainty of his love, a love that had chosen her not for wealth or status but for her heart. She thought of their first date, years ago, when Marcus had shown up at her tiny apartment with a bouquet of daisies, insisting on cooking dinner together, despite his wealth, a memory that reminded her how he'd always seen her true worth. "You didn't deserve that," he continued, starting the engine. The Bentley's purr a soothing contrast to the chaos of the morning. "Let's make this day better. How about we get those lilies you wanted, and have lunch somewhere special?" Elena managed a small laugh, the sound fragile but genuine, the first crack of light through her earlier darkness. "You remembered the lilies," she said, her voice soft, touched by his attention to the little things that mattered to her. Marcus grinned, the familiar spark in his eyes returning, and pulled the car into the flow of traffic, the city unfolding before them like a canvas of possibility. They drove to a quaint florist shop a few blocks away, its window bursting with vibrant blooms, and Marcus insisted she pick out the most extravagant bouquet, his playful encouragement coaxing a real smile from her. Inside, the air was thick, with the sweet scent of roses and lilies, and as Alina selected a bundle of white flowers, their petals soft as hope, she felt her spirit lift, the bank's cruelty fading like a bad dream. Marcus carried the bouquet to the car, placing it gently in her lap, and they drove to a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, its tables adorned with linen and candlelight, a world away from the cold marble of Metropolitan Bank. Over lunch, as they shared stories and laughter over plates of grilled salmon and crisp wine, Alina felt the last traces of her humiliation dissolve, replaced by a warmth that came from being truly seen and valued. She glanced at Marcus, his face relaxed now, the fierce protector from the bank giving way to the man who loved her fiercely, flaws and all. Between bites, her mind drifted to her past, to the small town where she'd grown up, where money was scarce but kindness was abundant. She'd carried that kindness into her marriage, choosing simplicity over the flash of Marcus's world, and today had tested that choice in ways she hadn't expected. Yet here, with him, she felt stronger, not because of his wealth or power, but because of the way he championed her dignity. Back at the bank, though Elena couldn't see it, the fallout was unfolding. Victoria sat slumped in her office, her colleagues whispering in hushed tones as the news of Harper Enterprises' withdrawal spread like wildfire. The branch's viability hung in the balance, and Victoria's demotion was all but certain. Her earlier arrogance now a costly mistake. Elena, unaware of these ripples, felt a quiet triumph, not in Victoria's downfall, but in her own resilience. As they left the restaurant, the city skyline glowing under the afternoon sun, Marcus reached for her hand, his touch a promise that they were in this together. "You're the strongest person I know," he said, his voice thick with admiration. "You faced that with grace, and I'm so proud of you." Elena's eyes welled, but this time the tears were born of gratitude, not pain. She squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of the day transform into something empowering, a reminder that her worth wasn't tied to appearances but to the love and strength she carried within. As they drove home, the lilies cradled in her lap, Alina glanced at the city passing by, its chaos and beauty a reflection of her own journey. The bank had tried to diminish her, but with Marcus by her side, she had emerged whole, her heart touched by the justice of his stand and the depth of their bond. The day, once marked by shame, was now a testament to their unyielding partnership, a story she would carry forever. 3 months had passed since the ordeal at Metropolitan Bank, and Alina Harper stood in her sunlit kitchen, arranging a fresh bouquet of lilies in a crystal vase on the dining table, their delicate petals a quiet echo of the day that had changed her perspective forever. The autumn light had softened into winter's gentle glow, and the city outside their apartment hummed with its usual rhythm. But Alina carried a new sense of peace, a hard-won clarity born from the events of that September. morning, the humiliation inflicted by Victoria Langston had faded, not because time erased pain, but because Alina had reclaimed her strength. Bolstered by Marcus's unwavering love and the lessons they'd both learned about dignity and resilience, their life had settled into a new normal, their accounts now at a smaller, friendlier bank where tellers greeted Alina by name, their smiles warm and genuine, a stark contrast to the cold judgment of Metropolitan's marble lobby. Each visit there felt like a small victory, a reminder that respect could transform even the simplest interactions into moments of connection. One chilly afternoon, as Alina sorted through the mail, a handwritten envelope caught her eye, its elegant script addressed to her in a hand she didn't recognize. Inside was a letter from Victoria Langston, written not on the bank's letterhead, but on personal stationery, its tone worlds away from the arrogance she'd wielded that day. Victoria apologized with a sincerity that surprised Alina, admitting her prejudice and thanking her for a lesson that had reshaped her perspective. She revealed she'd been demoted, her role as branch manager stripped away, but wrote that the experience had humbled her, teaching her to see people beyond their appearances. "I was wrong about you, Mrs. Harper," the letter read, "and I'll carry that regret always, but also gratitude for what I've learned." Alina stood by the window, the letter in her hands, her heart stirring with a complex mix of emotions. Stay, not quite fully formed, but a softening toward the woman who had once made her feel so small. She didn't respond, but she didn't discard the letter either, tucking it into a drawer as a quiet reminder that even the hardest moments could spark change in others. Her thoughts drifted to her childhood, to the small town where her mother had taught her that kindness was a currency more valuable than gold, a lesson she'd carried into her marriage with Marcus. That day at the bank had tested her, but it had also deepened her gratitude for the life they'd built, one where love and respect outweighed wealth or status. Marcus, sensing her quiet reflection, joined her in the kitchen, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as they looked out at the city skyline. "You okay?" he asked, his voice a familiar comfort, and she nodded, leaning into him, the lily scent mingling with the warmth of his presence. "I was just thinking about how much that day changed me," she said, her voice soft but steady. "It hurt, but it also showed me how strong we are together." Marcus kissed her temple, his love a steady anchor, and they stood there, wrapped in the quiet certainty of their bond. The new bank had become a place of warmth, where Elena's transactions, no matter how small, were met with smiles and small talk about the weather or weekend plans. A reminder that dignity could thrive in everyday moments. She thought of the other customers at Metropolitan, the ones who had watched her humiliation in silence, and wondered if any had carried the lesson of that day forward, perhaps treating a stranger with a bit more kindness. The letter from Victoria was a small proof that change was possible, that even those who judged harshly could grow, and that thought brought Alina a quiet hope. As she arranged the final lily in the vase, its white petals catching the light, she felt a sense of closure, not just for herself, but for the broader truth the day had revealed, that worth lies in character, not in the clothes you wear, or the assumptions others make. Marcus, sensing her resolve, suggested they take a walk through the park, and as they stepped out into the winter air, hand in hand, Alina felt lighter, her heart touched by the journey from shame to empowerment. The city stretched before them, vibrant and alive, and she knew this story, her story, would stay with her, a testament to the power of love and the enduring value of treating others with respect. She glanced at Marcus, his eyes bright with the same love that had carried them through that day, and smiled, ready to face whatever came next, knowing they'd face it together.